And this moment has certainly brought into sharp focus the relationship between the police and the communities they serve. Tensions are high across the country. It really goes without saying. And now I'd like to bring in former Chicago Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson for a law enforcement perspective. Superintendent Johnson, thanks so much for being here.
Not a problem, Lizzie. Glad to be here.
So many, as you know, are out protesting what they see as police brutality. George Floyd, in their minds, just the latest example. And now police must control massive, sometimes angry crowds. How can this be done without resorting to some of the tactics that protesters are upset about to begin with?
You know, Lindsay, I think it's important for law enforcement to develop relationships with the communities before something like this happens. And now what you have a group of legitimate protesters that's seeking change, but then their protests are getting hijacked, by certain smaller groups that are just dedicated to destruction and chaos. So now it's important that the police get with community leaders, clergy in their neighborhoods, and talk to them and stand united, to try and calm this down. But, when you use force or you're very aggressive, that doesn't help the situation. And in my time in Chicago, I learned that pulling the police back sometimes from those skirmish lines would help calm those situations.
Yeah, and so what specifically would you tell your officers if you were still chief in Chicago?
So I would tell you this. We dealt with a number of incidents while I was superintendent. And what I would do before we put the police out there on the front line, myself or some member of the command staff would have a 10 to 15 minute talk with them, and we would just emphasize protecting everybody's First Amendment rights. But we would also challenge each officer, if you see your partner becoming too aggressive, then you pull them back. We would also ensure that the supervisors monitor their folks. And if they saw that they were getting too aggressive or their emotions were getting high, to pull them back. Because you got to remember, these cops are humans too. They're people too. So they can get emotional. But we also stress, they have a right to protest. We only get physical if we have to. But we always stress we try not to do that, especially when protesters are fairly peaceful.
Are you concerned at this moment that too much police and National Guard presence might only raise tensions? And how can police work to build trust in this moment?
Yeah, you build trust by letting the communities know what you're doing before you do it. And you got a point. When you militarize things, you kind of send a message up to the people that's protesting, come on, we're ready for a fight. So I tended not to use that particular tactic unless it was absolutely necessary. Now, I would have them tucked away just in case it got out of hand. But, up front, you go in with a soft look and you try talking to them. Oftentimes, before we had protests, we would find out who the organizers were, and we would go have conversations with them, and we would help them conduct their protests.
And how can police best separate the peaceful protesters from the criminals and anarchists who could potentially hijack this moment? And can it be difficult for police to figure out who's who in the midst of all the chaos?
It is. It's very difficult. Now, I will say this. A lot of times in legitimate protests, the protesters themselves will point those folks out to you. And sometimes when you have those splinter groups, they'll dress a certain way so they would be readily identifiable. But if they weren't, a lot of times the protesters will point them out to us.
And we sometimes hear that violent or racist police officers are just bad apples. Do you think that it should be easier to convict officers in police-involved shootings, or at least fire them if they've been the subject of multiple complaints?
Yeah, I mean, at the very least, we should be able to get rid of them off the job. Because I tell you, Lindsay, in looking at the video of George Floyd, if there's any police officer in this country thinks there was anything about that was okay, then they shouldn't be a police officer. But before we can get the public's trust, law enforcement as a profession, we have to do a better job of identifying those problem officers, those bad actors, and, policing them ourselves, whether it be fire them, criminal charges, whatever the case may be. We have to show the public that we're serious also. I'm an African-American man who's been in Chicago my entire life. And so I've seen this, over the course of my life. And, at this point, it's a shame that in 2020, we're still having this conversation. So as law enforcement professionals, we have to get serious about holding our own accountable.
Still having the conversation in 2020. You are right. And thank you so much for talking with us. Former Chicago Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson. We appreciate it.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.